There we go. Right, I'm on. We've got tech. I think we're good to go. So, good morning, Central Church. A particular greeting to our Scottish members today. I know we've got at least one in the form of Harry, because today is St Andrew's Day. And before anyone asks, you don't have to be called Andy to speak on St Andrew's Day, but hopefully it helps. It's my pleasure, as Vicky says, to be carrying on with our sermon series in Luke. This Sunday is also Advent Sunday, for those of us who grew up in the Church of England and so have that kind of embedded liturgical calendar in our psyche. It's the first day of the church year, and Advent, Vicky's already sort of started talking about Christmas. Advent is about so much more than chocolate. Although for the young people in the room, Advent calendars and chocolate are important, so I'm not dissing that in any way. Advent really is a season of preparation, not just to remember and celebrate Jesus' first coming 2,000 odd years ago in Israel, but to prepare ourselves also for his second coming, his return to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem at an unknown point in the future. So I hope that as we look at today's passage in Luke, we'll see it as helpful in our preparation for Jesus' return. So, 20 years ago today, I was in the period between asking two of the most important questions of my life. I'd asked Angie, big up to my mother-in-law, hello Angie, and her husband Bruce for permission to marry Rebecca, and was waiting for the opportunity the next weekend to get Rebecca's view on the matter. Thankfully, Rebecca said yes, and the rest is history. So that was a very good Saturday morning in Richmond Park. Now, questions are important, and it's great to have the kids and the young people here today, because I get the feeling that you get asked a lot of questions. You're at school and teachers go, what does this mean? How do you do this? How do you do that? And also, young people are quite good at asking lots of questions as well. Normally, why? And for some of the parents of younger children over there in the corner, I can see a knowing smile going, yes, we've had that too much today already. So, today we're going to be looking at three questions. They're questions that Jesus asked his disciples, but they're actually questions that he is still asking us today. And I think they're actually probably the three most important questions we can ever answer. So can we have the first slide, please? So the passage today is Luke chapter 9, verses 18 to 26. I'm reading from the NIV version. I'm going to start with verses 18 to 20. So, once when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, who do the crowds say I am? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets from long ago has come back to life. But what about you? He asked. Who do you say I am? Peter answered, God's Messiah. Let's just think about the gravity of that statement for a moment. Peter is saying, you are the one that all Israel has been waiting for ever since the promises to Abraham. Now, Matthew and Mark, in their Gospels, place this event, very specifically in a place called Caesarea Philippi. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, this is my inner geek coming out. So here's a map. So this is, let's turn this on. Brilliant. So, where's it? Oh, is it working? Nathaniel, what have you done to the pointer? Yeah, Nathaniel, you come up and sort out this piece of tech that was working before you started playing with it. Oh. Anyway, is it that?
You just press that button.
Okay, fine. Well, I didn't know that, did I? Brilliant. So, there we are. Kids, brilliant, can be annoying. So here's the north of Israel. Here's the Sea of Galilee, and right up here in the north, almost at the border of Lebanon and of Syria, is the town of Caesarea Philippi. Here is Capernaum. This was where a couple of weeks ago Craig was talking to us about the Jesus healing the centurion's servant. And down here is Nazareth, where Jesus spent most of his childhood. So we're still right in the north of Israel, but today Jesus has taken his disciples about 15 miles north, away from the Sea of Galilee, where he's been ministering for most of the first couple of years, right up there to the foot of Mount Hermon. Now, so why has Jesus gone there? So let's start by working out, why is Caesarea Philippi important? It's a kind of Roman city, well, Roman, Gentile city, really, built by Herod the Great, started in about 19 BC. So this is the Herod who, in our Christmas story, the wise men come to visit, he has a strop, he tells his soldiers to go and kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem. So that Herod built Caesarea Philippi. After his death, it was then expanded by his son Philip, and Philip then renamed it. And because he was a bit of a sort of political mover and shaker, he thought, I'm going to name it after the Roman emperor, so Caesar, and then because I'm quite big on myself, I'll also name it after myself. So that's why it's called Caesarea Philippi. Now, as you can see, he was clearly not a shy and retiring kind of political fixer. Now, Tiberius was the Roman emperor at this time, and in Rome, he wasn't yet worshipped as a god. But in the provinces of the empire, in order to create a kind of cultural glue that held the empire together, he was starting to allow people to worship him as a god and venerate the emperor in the provinces. Now, so in this city, in Caesarea Philippi, we now have a temple to the Roman emperor, Tiberius, and we have a temple to the Greek gods Pan and Zeus. And if you go there today, you can still see all the ruins of these three temples. So, Jesus has intentionally brought his disciples here into the centre of foreign, pagan, idolatrous worship to ask them the two questions from our passage. He's brought them to the temple of Tiberius, a temple to a man who started to be worshipped as a god. He's brought them to the temple of Pan, a temple to a god who appears in physical form as a half-man, half-goat hybrid. He's brought them to the place where human religion has physical gods to worship. And he asks them the question, who do you say that I am? Do the disciples yet have the understanding to recognize that Jesus is infinitely superior, is incomparable to Tiberius and to Pan? Both of these are kind of half-man, half-god hybrids. Jesus, fully God, fully man. Can we have the third slide, please, to come back to our passage? So, in verse 18, before Jesus asks his disciples these questions, Luke tells us that he's praying. And throughout the Gospels, we tend to see that when Jesus does something significant, he prays first. And the same should apply to us, even more so. So, side note, church prayer meeting tonight, 7 p.m, my house. If you want to know where I live, come and see me afterwards. Do come and pray for the church, the town, and our world. So firstly, Jesus asked the disciples, who do the crowd say I am? And he's asking us the same question in 21st century Devon today. He could have asked it perhaps a bit differently. He'd say, who does TikTok say I am? Who does artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, say that I am? Who do your friends say that I am? And the crowds have been following Jesus around for the last 2.5 years. They haven't really got yet who Jesus is. And so they offered suggestions like John the Baptist, who'd recently been beheaded. Now, as a side note, he'd been beheaded by another Herod, and John the Baptist was beheaded for criticising the new Herod's adulterous marriage to his half-brother Philip's ex-wife. this is the same Philip who's built Caesarea Philippi. So maybe there's another reason why Jesus thought this is a good place to sort of address all the questions that the crowd has around who he is. John the Baptist had been a fantastically powerful preacher, and the crowds had clearly seen in Jesus that same ability to preach and to teach. Elijah, one of the most powerful prophets of the Hebrew scriptures of our Old Testament. Elijah had raised a widow's son from the dead. And as we saw a couple of weeks ago, Jesus had just raised a widow's son from the dead. So the crowds think that and go, ooh, maybe this man is is another Elijah. Then, in the case of sort of before the ministry of John the Baptist, there had been no prophet to Israel for about 450 years since Malachi. So to put that in context for us, 400 plus years ago in British history, we have the Spanish Armada, 437 years ago, the Union of the Crowns of England and Scotland, I had to pick that up because it's St Andrew's Day, 422 years ago, and the English Civil War, 380 years ago. Now, I don't know about you, but I think of these as kind of so far distant past, it's kind of dinosaur territory. And that's how long Israel had gone without hearing anything from God. And suddenly Jesus appears and is delivering them the word of God time after time after time after time after time. And so you can see why the crowds thought, wow, one of the Old Testament prophets has come back to life. But the crowds actually got this wrong. They'd really missed the essence, the essential of who Jesus was. In the same way today, I went on to ChatGPT and said, who's Jesus? And came up with some pretty interesting answers. So we have a moral guide, a great example of how people should live. And that's true. Jesus is a moral guide. He is an example of how people should live. But he's so much more than that. And so ChatGPT, AI today missed the point. Then Jesus turns to his disciples and says, okay, you've told me kind of who the crowds think I am. That's great. But you, who do you say I am? And then Peter, and if you've been a Christian for any amount of time, you'll know that Peter is the kind of foot in mouth, speak before you think sort of guy. And so he seems to appoint himself as the spokesman of the disciples here, because when Jesus says, who do you say that I am? It's you, Paul. It's kind of, who do you all say I am? Peter goes, you're God's Messiah. And in Matthew's account, Peter adds to that, the Son of the living God. So Peter and the disciples have got the right answer. Jesus is indeed God's Messiah. But kind of Messiah, what does this mean in English? So Messiah is a Hebrew word which literally means anointed one. And so what Peter is saying is that Jesus is God's promised deliverer, the one who has been foretold throughout the Hebrew scriptures, our Old Testament, who's going to come to deliver Israel from oppression and bring about God's kingdom on earth. At this point, the disciples have been following Jesus probably about 2.5 years. So they finally started to get to an understanding of who Jesus really is. It's taken them some time to get to this point. A chapter earlier in Luke's Gospel, in one of the events we skipped over, the disciples are on the Sea of Galilee, they're in some boats, they're all fishermen, well, most of them are fishermen, so they should be quite used to storms on the sea. Big storm comes up, they all start worrying they're going to drown. They wake Jesus up because he's having a nap in the boat, and Jesus says, okay, fine. Waves, calm down, wind, be calm. And it goes dead calm. And the disciples all turn to one another and go, who's this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. So even a chapter before, they hadn't really clocked who Jesus was. And hopefully that's encouraging for us, that even the disciples who were with Jesus for 2+ years, it took them quite some time to work out that Jesus is actually the Son of God, that Jesus is the Messiah. And so if you're on a journey of faith today, be encouraged. These guys who are with Jesus 24/7, They took some time to get there as well. So Jesus is asking us that same question today, this morning. He's asking me, Andy, who do you say that I am? His Spirit is with us today, asking the same question of all of us. John, who do you say Jesus is? Katie, who do you say Jesus is? Jess, who do you say Jesus is? Bob, who do you say Jesus is? If, like the disciples on the Sea of Galilee, you don't feel confident yet in how to answer that question, Harry's running the Discovery course, as we heard earlier, and you'd be very welcome to join him in the new year to explore the claim, explore my belief that Jesus is the Son of God. There's no questions that are off limits, and you will be guaranteed a warm and friendly welcome, because Harry's a great host. Can we have the next slide, please? Our passage then continues, again from the NIV version. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this, so to tell that he was the Messiah, to anyone. And he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law. He must be killed, and on the third day he will be raised to life. Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Whoever's ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. So, the disciples have come to a correct realization of who Jesus is, but now they need to realize what Jesus was coming to do. So, in verse 21, we say, Jesus strictly warned his disciples not to tell this to anyone. I think this is because the prevailing view of the Messiah, the expectation culturally in the community, was that the Messiah would be a conquering king who was going to free Israel from the tyranny of the Romans. Jesus didn't want to attract followers who were looking for a political freedom fighter when he had a very different mission in mind. Jesus kind of outlines his mission in verse 22, to suffer, be rejected, be killed, and then be raised to life. And in Matthew and Mark's accounts of this incident, Peter hears this and says, no, Jesus, you haven't got the right plan here. No, my plan is that you get rid of the Romans, probably that I get to be your kind of chief of staff or something, and so we get a nice Jewish political state back. And then Jesus says to Peter, no, you're completely got that wrong. And he actually tells Peter, get behind me, Satan. So Peter has gone from the hero status of you're God's Messiah within about 5 minutes to being told by Jesus, get behind me, Satan. Again, I think that there's an encouragement certainly for me here, that you can go from hero to zero pretty quickly, but then hopefully pick it back up again. So what's Jesus' real mission? Jesus was coming as a king. He was coming to deliver people from a hostile power, but the power he wanted to defeat wasn't that of the Romans. It was actually a bigger, much more significant power, the power of sin. The Bible's really clear that all of us have failed to live up to God's standards. For example, in the Apostle Paul's letter to the Roman Church, he says, all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And if we're honest, not only have we failed to live up to God's standards, we fail to live up to the standards we expect of ourselves, and certainly the standards we expect of others. Jesus' mission was to die in our place, to take the punishment we deserve and conquer sin on our behalf, to do something that we absolutely could not do. Defeating the Romans? Yeah, easy. They were just the sort of military superpower of the day. That wouldn't have been a problem if that was what Jesus' mission was. His mission was a much, much bigger, global, for all time mission. So, what's the response that the king expects of us We see this in verse 23. We must be his disciple, his follower, someone who wants to learn from him. We must deny ourselves, not give in to the easy temptations of comfort and sin. We must follow Jesus. We must get involved in the work of his kingdom. At school, at college, at work, in the home, we must be looking for opportunities to point our friends and colleagues to Jesus. So, at school, at college, how does that play out practically? Don't get involved in bullying other kids, but take the side of those who are being teased. At work, the Apostle Paul tells us to work as if Jesus was our employer, and by working well, we please God, as well as our human boss. At home, kids, Nathaniel, listen up, please. Please show respect to your parents, and if you have a sibling, please be kind to them. Parents, we need to point our kids to Jesus. And possibly, kids, that's a harder calling than simply being nice to us. If this all seems a bit overwhelming, but I think I saw a few smiles from parents in the room at that point, remember, we've got the Holy Spirit to help us. And when we get things wrong, as we will, Jesus is always ready and willing to forgive us when we ask him. Jesus says we must take up our cross. We must be prepared to follow Jesus to the end. In Devon at the moment, thankfully, that's not likely to be direct persecution. But our brothers and sisters in other countries face far worse on a regular basis. Jesus makes this point very clear in verses 24 to 26. If we want to save our physical life, focus on the here and now, and are ashamed of Jesus, we lose eternal life. We lose everything. We may gain everything in this world, but lose everything in the next. If we surrender control of our lives here in the present day to Jesus, we gain eternal life. And in verse 26, Jesus speaks of his second coming. And this is why it is quite nice to be looking at this at the start of Advent. The phrase Son of Man is a phrase that Jesus often used to describe himself. And it comes from the prophet Daniel, where in one of Daniel's visions, where he sees the Messiah coming to God and receiving authority and power. Jesus is going to come back. He's going to come back in his glory, in the Father's glory, and with the angels in their glory. The disciples and the crowd weren't wrong to expect the Messiah to come as a conquering king. They just hadn't realized the Messiah needed to come first as a suffering servant, to suffer on our behalf, to free us from the power of sin. Then he'll come back in glory and power and authority and majesty to judge the world and put an end to sin forever. This Advent, let's enjoy our chocolate, but let's also try and make sure we're ready to meet Jesus when he comes back. So 2 questions Jesus asked in our passage. Who do the crowd say I am? And who do you say I am? Do listen to TikTok to your friends, even to preachers in church, about Jesus. But don't rely on their views. Do your own research and know how to answer the question that Jesus really is asking everyone today. Who do you say I am? Don't delay making that decision. It's good to do your research, but don't keep on delaying it. The psalmist talks in one psalm about how important it is to make that decision today. None of us know when Jesus is going to come back, and it would just be a real shame if this Advent you didn't take that chance to find out who Jesus really is. Those of you who were really paying attention at the start might remember I said that there were 3 questions, and so far we've only done 2. Now don't worry, the third one's quite quick. Jesus asked Peter another question just before Jesus went back to heaven. And this is the one that I think goes right to the heart. And it's a great way to work out where our feelings about Jesus really are. It's a really simple question. Do you love me? Because knowing that Jesus is the Messiah, is the King, isn't enough. Earlier in Luke's Gospel, we've seen the evil spirits saying, you're the Messiah, you're the Son of God. So the evil spirits know this, but they don't have the right response to it. Their response is to continue to rebel and to ignore the claims of Jesus on their life. So we need to know the facts in our head, but then it's what happens in our heart that really matters. And so Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? And he's asking us the same question today. Do you love me? Yvonne, Jesus says, do you love me? Noah, he says, do you love me? Rebecca, Jesus says, do you love me? If we love him, we'll be ready to meet him when he returns.